The grand hall of the Ziyari Empire was silent. Tall golden pillars stretched toward the high ceiling, where glowing crystals cast soft blue light. The Ziyari High Council sat in a perfect circle, their expressions stern. In the center stood Princess Alcera, her hands clenched into fists. "This is unacceptable," she said, her silver eyes flashing with anger. "You cannot just give me away to a human." Across from her, the head counselor, an aged Ziyari with deep blue skin, folded his hands. His voice was calm but firm. "The Empire needs this alliance, Princess Alcera. The Terran Federation grows stronger each year. The political marriage will secure peace between our people." Alcera's heart pounded. She had trained her whole life to be a leader, to protect her people with wisdom and strength. But now, they were sending her away like a simple trade. And to a human, a species known for their unpredictable nature. She turned to her mother, Queen Irenia, hoping for support. But the queen, sitting on her high throne, only nodded. "This is the best path for the Ziyari." Alcera's breath caught in her throat. "Mother, do you truly believe that?" The queen's gaze softened. "I believe you are strong enough to face any challenge, my daughter. Even this." Alcera knew the decision was final. Her people needed peace, but deep inside, she feared what awaited her among humans. A week later, Alcera arrived on Terra Prime, the capital world of the Terran Federation. The air was crisp, and the sky stretched wide above a sprawling city of towering buildings and flashing lights. The humans who walked the streets stared at her curiously, but without fear. At the grand entrance of the Terran embassy, she saw him, Darren Hale, the man who was now her husband. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp green eyes that studied her with quiet intensity. His short brown hair was slightly unkempt, and he wore a dark military uniform with the Terran insignia on his chest. He looked nothing like the refined Ziyari nobles she had known. She lifted her chin, determined not to show weakness. "You are the human they have chosen for me." Darren raised an eyebrow. "I could ask the same about you." She frowned. "I do not belong to you." "I never said you did," he replied, his voice even. "This isn't about ownership. It's about survival." His words caught her off guard. She had expected arrogance, maybe even mockery, but he sounded indifferent, as if this arrangement was just another mission for him. The Terran commander, standing beside him, cleared his throat. "Princess Alcera, Captain Darren Hale will ensure your safety while you adapt to life here. This is a partnership, not a prison." Alcera crossed her arms. "And if I refuse to cooperate?" Darren sighed. "Then you'll be alone in a world you don't understand." His words made her stomach tighten. She was far from home, surrounded by a species she barely knew. The Ziyari were graceful, strategic, always in control. But humans? They were wild, unpredictable. How could she trust a man like Darren? Yet, deep inside, she knew she had no choice. With a steady breath, she gave a small nod. "Very well. Let us see if humans are truly as strong as they claim." Darren's lips curled slightly. Not quite a smile, but something close. "Then let's begin." As they walked side by side into the embassy, Alcera realized that this was not just about politics. It was about proving herself, both to the humans and to her own people. But more than that, it was about finding her own strength in a world where nothing was certain. And she would not fail. The doors of the Terran embassy slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a long hallway lined with glass panels. The view outside showed the city of Terra Prime, a vast, glowing metropolis of towering buildings and speeding airships. Princess Alcera walked beside Darren, her posture straight, her face unreadable. The air smelled different here, less refined than the controlled environments of her homeworld. Everything felt too open, too exposed. Darren glanced at her. "You don't look impressed." Alcera kept her gaze forward. "I have seen more advanced worlds." He smirked. "Welcome to Terra. We focus on strength, not just beauty." Alcera frowned. She didn't like his tone. It was as if he was challenging her. A woman in a sleek uniform approached them, holding a small tablet. "Captain Hale, the princess's quarters are ready. Shall I show her the way?" Alcera spoke before Darren could answer. "I do not need an escort." The woman blinked but nodded. "As you wish, princess." Darren led her through the halls, stopping in front of a large metallic door. It slid open, revealing a spacious but simple room. A bed, a desk, and a large window overlooking the city. No gold, no elegant decorations, nothing like the royal chamber she was used to. She stepped inside, her fingers tightening into fists. "Is this how you treat royalty?" Darren crossed his arms. "You're not in the Ziyari Empire anymore. This is how humans live. Practical and efficient." Alcera turned sharply. "You expect me to stay in a place like this?" Darren leaned against the doorway. "If you want silk pillows and servants, you're out of luck. But if you're willing to adapt, you'll find that humans have more to offer than luxury." Alcera glared at him but said nothing. She had expected humans to be crude, but she hadn't expected them to be so unconcerned with status. Back home, even the lowest noble lived in comfort. Here, even a Terran captain seemed to accept simplicity. "Get some rest," Darren said as he turned to leave. "Training starts tomorrow." Alcera's eyes narrowed. "Training?" Darren paused. "You want to survive here. Then you need to learn how humans fight, how we think. You might be strong, but strength alone won't help you in a real fight." Alcera lifted her chin. "Ziyari warriors train from birth. I do not need human lessons." Darren sighed. "Then prove it." Before she could respond, the door slid shut, leaving her alone. That night, Alcera could not sleep. She sat by the window, staring at the city below. The lights blinked like stars, and the streets pulsed with life. It was not like home, where everything was controlled and precise. Here, the energy was raw, chaotic. She hated to admit it, but she felt out of place. Her people had sent her here to ensure peace, but no one had asked if she wanted this. And this human, Darren Hale, treated her not as a princess, but as someone who needed to prove herself. Was she truly so weak in his eyes? The next morning, Alcera found Darren waiting for her outside the embassy. He had changed into a dark training uniform, his stance relaxed but alert. "Ready?" he asked. Alcera crossed her arms. "This is unnecessary." Darren shrugged. "Maybe. But if you want humans to respect you, you'll have to do more than wear a crown." Alcera clenched her jaw. She had never backed down from a challenge. "Fine. Show me." He led her to a training facility where human soldiers were practicing combat. They moved swiftly, their attacks sharp and aggressive. Unlike the precise, elegant movements of Ziyari warriors, humans fought with adaptability, switching styles, using the environment, never predictable. Darren gestured to an open area. "Let's see what you've got." Alcera stepped forward. "I will not hold back." Darren smiled. "Good." Their fight began. Alcera moved first, her strikes fast and fluid, her Ziyari training evident in every motion. But Darren dodged with ease, his movements different, less graceful, more unpredictable. She aimed a powerful kick at his chest. He caught her foot and twisted, sending her off balance. She barely managed to land on her feet. Alcera's eyes widened. He was toying with her. She attacked again, faster this time. But every time she struck, Darren adjusted, dodging, countering, forcing her to work harder. Then, in one swift motion, he grabbed her arm and flipped her onto the ground. She landed hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. For a moment, there was silence. The watching soldiers murmured among themselves. Darren extended a hand. "Not bad. But you rely too much on patterns." Alcera glared up at him. Her pride burned, but deep inside, another emotion stirred, frustration and curiosity. No one had ever bested her so easily. She took his hand, standing tall once more. Again. Darren's smile widened. That's the spirit. As they prepared for another round, Alcera knew one thing. This was only the beginning. Alcera stood in the training hall, her body tense, her pride wounded. The dull ache in her arms and legs reminded her of her earlier defeat at Darren's hands. She had trained since childhood, mastering the Ziyara warrior arts, yet a human had defeated her so easily. She refused to accept it. Across from her, Darren Hale stood relaxed, his green eyes sharp. Again, he asked, raising an eyebrow. Alcera narrowed her eyes. Again. She launched forward, her movements swift and precise. The Ziyari style was elegant, every strike calculated, every movement controlled. But humans fought differently. Darren did not follow a pattern. He dodged when she expected him to block. He attacked when she expected him to retreat. His movements were not perfect, but they were unpredictable. She aimed a punch at his ribs. He twisted at the last moment, grabbing her wrist and using her own momentum to pull her forward. Before she could react, he swept her legs out from under her. She hit the ground. Again. A murmur ran through the watching human soldiers. Some looked amused, others impressed. Alcera gritted her teeth. Back home, no one would have dared to humiliate a princess like this. Darren offered his hand. You rely too much on rehearsed movements, he said. You're skilled, but you don't adapt. Alcera ignored his hand and stood on her own. Ziyari warriors do not fight like wild animals. Darren smirked. That's your problem. Her eyes flashed. Excuse me. He crossed his arms. You think fighting should be perfect, but real battles aren't clean. If you're predictable, you lose. Alcera's hands curled into fists. She had heard enough. Again. Darren shook his head. Not today. She frowned. Are you afraid I will defeat you? Darren let out a short laugh. No, but fighting without learning is pointless. Alcera's frustration grew, but she could not argue. He was right. She had lost because she fought the way she had been trained, not the way she needed to fight against humans. Darren nodded toward the side of the room. Watch them. Alcera turned her gaze to the human soldiers training nearby. They sparred in pairs, their movements rough but effective. She noticed how they changed tactics mid-fight, adjusting instantly. If one method failed, they tried another. It was messy, but it worked. Darren spoke again. Strength alone won't win a war. If you want to fight like a human, you need to think like one. Alcera exhaled slowly. She hated losing, but she hated weakness even more. She turned back to him. Teach me. Darren nodded, satisfied. Then let's begin. The next few days were the hardest of Alcera's life. She trained from sunrise to sunset, sparring with humans of all sizes and skill levels. At first, she lost. Again and again. Her pride burned with every failure, but she refused to give up. She studied their movements, their tactics. She learned that humans did not care about elegance, only efficiency. Slowly, something changed. During one sparring session, a large human soldier charged at her, expecting to overpower her with brute strength. Instead of blocking, Alcera stepped aside at the last moment, using his own force against him. The soldier stumbled forward, and with a sharp movement, she knocked him to the ground. A few humans clapped. Darren, watching from the side, gave her a nod. Now you're getting it. Alcera straightened, breathing hard. For the first time, she felt a sense of victory. That night, as she sat in her room, she thought about everything that had happened. She had come to Terra Prime as a princess, expecting humans to treat her like one. But they didn't care about titles, only what she could prove. And she had proven nothing yet. Darren was different from the nobles of her world. He did not bow. He did not flatter. He challenged her, forced her to grow. It frustrated her, but it also intrigued her. For the first time in her life, she was not being protected. She was being tested. And she would not fail. She could not fail. Alcera moved swiftly across the training hall, her breath steady, her body tense with focus. The human soldiers surrounded her in a loose circle, watching with curiosity and amusement. Darren stood in front of her, arms crossed. "You're improving," he admitted, "but you still hesitate." Alcera clenched her jaw. Hesitate. She had trained harder than ever, studying human tactics, adapting her fighting style. Yet Darren always found something to criticize. "I do not hesitate," she said firmly. Darren raised an eyebrow. "Prove it." Before she could respond, he attacked. Alcera barely had time to react. She dodged to the side, but Darren was fast. His fist came toward her shoulder, and instead of blocking like she normally would, she moved with the strike. His momentum carried him forward, and she spun around, catching his arm and twisting, just as she had seen the human soldiers do. For the first time, she felt his balance shift. Darren's eyes widened slightly as he stumbled, but before she could take advantage, he twisted his body and broke free, stepping back with a grin. "Now that's progress," he said. Alcera straightened, her heart still pounding. She had almost had him. Almost. The watching soldiers murmured, impressed. A few even nodded in approval. Alcera exhaled. She was earning their respect. After training, Alcera sat outside the Terran embassy, staring at the city beyond. The neon lights blinked in the distance, and airships moved through the sky like silent shadows. Darren walked up beside her, holding 2 bottles of water. He handed her one. "You're adjusting faster than I expected," he said. Alcera took the bottle, frowning. "Did you believe I would fail?" Darren shrugged. "Not fail. But I thought you'd be too stubborn to change." Alcera huffed. "I am not stubborn." Darren chuckled. "You say that, but I've seen you refuse to stop training, even when you're exhausted." Alcera looked away, gripping the bottle tightly. "I must become stronger." Darren leaned against the railing, watching her. "Why?" Alcera hesitated. She had many reasons. Duty, pride, honor. But the truth was something deeper. "In my world," she said slowly, "a princess must be perfect. She must be wise, strong, and respected. But no one ever taught me how to be truly powerful." Darren was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Strength isn't about perfection. It's about never stopping, even when things don't go your way." Alcera glanced at him. "Is that how humans think?" Darren smirked. "It's how I think." Something in his voice made Alcera curious. He spoke as if he had learned this lesson through experience. "You are not always strong," she guessed. Darren's expression darkened slightly. "No one is born strong." She wanted to ask more, but he straightened and changed the subject. "Come on, you need rest." Alcera sighed. She hated resting, but for once, she did not argue. The next morning, Alcera arrived at the training hall early. The human soldiers greeted her with nods, a silent acceptance. She had proven herself, and they recognized it. Darren stood waiting, a small device in his hand. "What is that?" Alcera asked. "A combat simulator," he said. "It'll test your skills in real-time scenarios. Think you're ready." Alcera lifted her chin. "I am always ready." Darren smirked. "We'll see." He activated the device, and the room transformed. The floor shimmered, and suddenly, they were standing on a battlefield. Digital enemies appeared, human-sized figures with weapons, moving toward her. Alcera's instincts kicked in. She moved fast, dodging the first attack and countering with precision. A digital opponent lunged at her, and she sidestepped, using Darren's earlier lesson to throw it off balance. More enemies came. She adapted, using both her Zayari training and the human techniques she had learned. For the first time, she felt fluid, powerful, unstoppable. When the simulation ended, she stood in the center, breathing hard but victorious. The human soldiers clapped. Even Darren looked impressed. He walked up to her. "Not bad, princess." Alcera smirked. "Not bad for a human. either. Darren chuckled. You're learning. Alcera wiped sweat from her brow. She had come here as a stranger, a princess given away for an alliance she did not choose. But now she was becoming something more. She was becoming strong in her own way. And this was only the beginning. Alcera stood in the training hall, her body still tense from the combat simulation. The energy from her victory still lingered, but she knew one win was not enough. She had to be better, stronger, unstoppable. Darren watched her, his usual smirk on his face. You did well, he said, tossing her a towel. She caught it easily. I could do better. Darren chuckled. You sound like a human now. Alcera frowned. What do you mean? You're not just fighting to prove yourself anymore. You're fighting to improve, he said. That's what real warriors do. Alcera considered his words. Back home, training had always been about status. A Zayari princess had to be perfect. But here, among humans, training was about growth. And she liked that. The next morning, Darren called her to the military command center. What is this place? She asked as they stepped inside. Large monitors filled the room, displaying battle simulations, fleet movements, and combat strategies. Human officers worked at their stations, discussing tactics in low voices. This is where we plan real battles, Darren said. And today, you're part of the planning. Alcera raised an eyebrow. Me? Darren nodded. You've trained with us, but war isn't just about fighting. It's about thinking ahead. A tall officer with gray hair turned toward them. This the princess? Darren nodded. Yes. Alcera, this is Commander Vance. Vance studied her. I've heard about your progress. You're learning fast. Alcera lifted her chin. I learn what is necessary. Vance nodded approvingly. Good. Then let's see how you handle a real challenge. He motioned toward the holographic table in the center of the room. The image of a battlefield appeared, a desert landscape with enemy forces spread across it. This is a simulation of a possible battle between human forces and an unknown alien threat, Vance explained. Your task is to plan an attack. Alcera narrowed her eyes, studying the battlefield. This was different from anything she had done before. Fighting was one thing, but planning a full strategy. She glanced at Darren. He gave her an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, Alcera stepped forward. I will do it. For the next few hours, Alcera worked with the human officers, analyzing enemy movements, terrain advantages, and possible weaknesses. At first, she tried using Zayari strategies, but she quickly realized that human warfare was different. Humans relied on adaptability, changing their tactics based on the situation. It reminded her of how Darren fought. She adjusted her plan, thinking like a human instead of a princess. She used decoys, flanking maneuvers, and unpredictable attacks. When the simulation ran, her plan worked perfectly. The human officers exchanged glances. Vance crossed his arms, looking impressed. Well, he said, looks like our princess is more than just a fighter. Alcera felt a spark of pride. She had proven herself again. Darren grinned. Told you she was smart. Alcera glanced at him. There was something different in his expression. Not just approval, but something deeper. She quickly looked away. That evening, Alcera found herself walking through the human city. She had spent so much time training that she had barely seen the world outside the embassy. Humans moved around her, busy with their lives. The air smelled of unfamiliar food, and neon lights glowed above the streets. Darren walked beside her, hands in his pockets. You did well today, he said. Alcera nodded. It was different, but I enjoyed it. Darren smirked. Be careful. You might start liking humans too much. Alcera gave him a sharp look. I already do. Darren blinked in surprise. She hesitated, realizing what she had just said. But it was true. She had come here as a proud Zayari princess, believing humans were weaker, undisciplined. Now she saw the truth. Humans were strong, not just in battle, but in mind and spirit. And she wanted to be part of that strength. Darren's smirk softened into a small smile. Then you're finally seeing things the right way. Alcera looked at him, a strange warmth in her chest. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like she belonged. Alcera stood on the balcony of the Terran embassy, looking at the night sky. The human world was so different from her home. The air smelled of metal and smoke. The streets were full of noise. And the people, they were free. Back on Zayara, everything was controlled. A princess had duties, expectations, and limits. But here, she had choice. And that terrified her. Footsteps sounded behind her. She turned to see Darren walking toward her, hands in his pockets. "You're thinking too much again," he said with a smirk. Alcera crossed her arms. "Humans think too much as well." Darren chuckled. "Maybe. But we also act." She frowned. "What do you mean?" Darren leaned against the railing. "You've trained with us, fought with us, and even planned battles with us. But you're still holding back." Alcera stiffened. "Holding back?" Darren nodded. "You fight hard, but you're still thinking like a princess, like someone who follows orders." He turned to face her. "What do you want, Alcera?" "Not as a princess, as a warrior." The question caught her off guard. What did she want? For so long, she had been taught that her path was already decided. That she would serve her people, that she would marry for alliance, that she would follow the traditions of her ancestors. But now, she had seen another way. Alcera looked at Darren, searching his expression. He wasn't mocking her. He truly wanted to know her answer. She took a deep breath. "I want to be strong," she said, "not because I am a princess, but because I choose to be." Darren smiled. "Then you're ready." Alcera frowned. "Ready for what?" Darren pushed away from the railing. "Follow me." Darren led her to the military training grounds. It was nearly empty, except for Commander Vance and a few high-ranking officers. A holographic screen displayed a mission briefing. Alcera glanced at Darren. "What is this?" Vance stepped forward. "A real mission," he said. "Not a simulation. A rescue operation." Alcera's eyes widened. "You want me to fight in a real battle?" Vance nodded. "You've proven yourself in training. Now it's time to prove yourself in the field." The hologram showed a small human outpost on a distant moon. It had been attacked by unknown forces, and several human soldiers were trapped inside. "The enemy is using energy disruptors," Vance explained. "That means our usual tech won't work. We need warriors who can fight without relying on advanced weapons." Alcera's heart pounded. They needed fighters like her. Darren crossed his arms. "You don't have to do this, Alcera. It's dangerous." Alcera's hands clenched into fists. She had trained for this. She had studied human tactics, learned their ways. This was her chance to prove she was more than just a princess. She lifted her chin. "I will go." Vance nodded, as if he had expected this answer. "Good," he said. "We leave at dawn." That night, Alcera prepared in silence. She strapped on light armor, adjusted her blades, and studied the mission plan. Darren entered her room, arms crossed. "Are you sure about this?" Alcera glanced at him. "Do you doubt me?" Darren sighed. "No, but this isn't training. You could get hurt." Alcera gave him a small smirk. "You could get hurt too." Darren chuckled. "True, but I don't have an entire alien empire waiting for me to return." Alcera's expression grew serious. "That empire expects me to be a symbol, not a warrior." She met his gaze. "But I will not be a symbol. I will be something real." Darren stared at her for a moment, then nodded. "Then I guess I better watch your back out there." Alcera felt a warmth in her chest. She had always been alone in her struggles. But now she had someone beside her. She tightened the straps on her armor and turned toward the door. Tomorrow, she would fight not as a princess, but as a warrior. And she would prove, once and for all, that she was ready. The dropship shook as it entered the moon's atmosphere. Alcera tightened her grip on the safety harness, feeling the vibration through her armor. The human soldiers around her checked their weapons, their faces serious. Darren sat across from her, securing his gear. Last chance to back out, princess. Alcera gave him a sharp look. I told you, I am not a princess here. Darren smirked. Good. Then let's show these enemies what you can do. Commander Vance's voice crackled through the comms. Team, listen up. We have 6 human soldiers trapped inside the base. Enemy forces are using energy disruptors, which means our advanced weapons are useless. We fight with blades, close combat, and strategy. Alcera nodded to herself. This was her kind of fight. The dropship doors opened. Cold wind rushed inside as the moon's rocky surface came into view. The burned remains of human vehicles lay scattered, and in the distance, the outpost was surrounded by alien enemies. Tall, armored beings with glowing eyes. Vance's voice was firm. Move out. As soon as they hit the ground, the enemy forces spotted them. Bright blue energy bolts shot through the air. Alcera moved quickly, dodging behind cover. Darren crouched beside her. Their weapons work, but ours don't. That's a problem. Alcera unsheathed her twin blades, their sharp edges gleaming. Not for me. Darren grinned. That's the spirit. Before he could say more, Alcera charged forward. The enemy warriors were fast, but Alcera was faster. She dodged a strike, spinning around the first attacker and slashing across his armor. Sparks flew as he stumbled back. Another enemy swung at her, but she ducked, kicking his leg and sending him crashing to the ground. Darren followed right behind her, using his combat knife to take down another enemy. The human soldiers fought with determination, using their training and experience to push forward. The enemy forces started falling back, surprised by their resistance. Vance's voice came through the comms. We have to reach the base entrance before they regroup. Move. They reached the outpost doors, but they were sealed from the inside. Darren pounded on the metal. This is Lieutenant Darren of the Terran military. Open up. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a weak voice came through the radio. We can't. The enemy hacked the system. We're trapped. Alcera glanced at the door's control panel. It flickered weakly, clearly damaged. She turned to Darren. We don't have time for this. The enemy will be back soon. Darren cursed under his breath. We need another way in. Alcera scanned the area. Her sharp eyes spotted a ventilation shaft above them. It was small, but it led into the base. I can fit through there, she said. Darren frowned. Are you sure? Alcera smirked. Afraid I'll get lost. Darren chuckled. More like afraid you'll take all the credit. She climbed up swiftly, using her agility to reach the vent. Sliding inside, she crawled through the tight space, her heart pounding. Inside the base, it was dark. Emergency lights flickered, and she could hear faint breathing. The trapped soldiers. She dropped down silently and saw 6 humans, wounded but alive. One of them, a young soldier, gasped. You're not human. Alcera smirked. No, but I'm here to help. She rushed to the control panel and began working. The system was damaged, but she used her Ziyari knowledge to override the security locks. With a loud hiss, the doors opened. Darren and the other soldiers stormed inside, weapons raised. We're getting you out of here, he called. The wounded soldiers looked at them with relief. Thank you. Alcera helped one of them to his feet. Can you walk? He nodded weakly. I'll try. But before they could move, a loud roar echoed through the halls. Alcera's eyes narrowed. Something's coming. Darren readied his knife. Then we fight. The battle wasn't over yet. A deep growl echoed through the dark hallways of the base. The air grew heavy, and the human soldiers tensed, gripping their weapons. Darren stepped beside Alcera, his eyes scanning the shadows. That doesn't sound good. Alcera gripped her twin blades, her heart pounding. Be ready. Suddenly, The metal walls shook, and a massive figure stepped into the dim light. It was twice the size of a human, covered in dark armor with glowing red eyes. This was no ordinary enemy. One of the wounded soldiers gasped. "It's their commander." The alien commander let out a low, rumbling laugh. "Foolish humans," he said in a deep voice. "You think you can escape." His gaze shifted to Alcera. "And you, a Zayari princess, fighting alongside them. Pathetic." Alcera narrowed her eyes. "I am no princess here. I am a warrior." The alien commander sneered. "Then prove it." With a sudden burst of speed, he lunged at her. Alcera dodged, rolling to the side just as his massive energy blade slashed through the air. The ground cracked from the impact. Darren threw a knife at the commander's head, but the alien blocked it with his armored arm. The weapon bounced off uselessly. "He's too strong," a soldier shouted. Alcera clenched her jaw. Strength alone won't win this fight. She needed to be faster, smarter. She dashed forward, striking with her twin blades. The alien commander blocked her attack, but she twisted her body midair, flipping behind him and slashing at his exposed side. Her blade cut through the armor, drawing dark liquid. The alien commander roared in pain and swung his massive arm, knocking her back. Alcera crashed against a metal crate, pain shooting through her body. Darren rushed to her side. "Are you okay?" She groaned but pushed herself up. "I've had worse." The alien commander charged toward them, his heavy steps shaking the ground. Darren pulled out a small explosive device from his belt. "I have an idea." Alcera wiped blood from her lip. "I hope it's a good one." Darren tossed the explosive to her. "You're faster than me. Get this under his armor." Alcera caught the device, nodding. "Cover me." Darren and the other soldiers opened fire, aiming at the alien's head and legs, forcing him to block with his massive arms. Alcera used the distraction. She darted forward, her body moving like a shadow. She slid under the commander's swing, twisting around him. With a quick motion, she shoved the explosive into a crack in his armor. The alien commander froze, realizing what had happened. Alcera jumped back. "Now." Darren pressed the detonator. A loud explosion tore through the air as the commander's armor shattered. He stumbled, his glowing eyes flickering. Alcera didn't waste the opportunity. She rushed forward, leaping high into the air. With a final powerful strike, she drove both blades into his chest. The alien commander let out a guttural gasp, then collapsed. Silence filled the air. One of the soldiers whispered, "She did it." Darren grinned. "Told you she was tough." Alcera pulled out her blades, breathing heavily. "No time to celebrate. More enemies will come." Vance's voice crackled through the radio. "Dropship is inbound. Get to the landing zone now." The team rushed through the base, helping the wounded move as fast as they could. As they stepped outside, they saw enemy reinforcements approaching from the distance. Darren cursed. "They're not giving up." Alcera turned to the soldiers. "Get the wounded onto the dropship. We'll hold them off." Darren smirked. "We?" Alcera lifted her blades. "You think I'd leave you to fight alone?" Darren chuckled. "Didn't think so." The remaining human soldiers formed a defensive line, holding back the enemy just long enough for the last of the wounded to get aboard. Vance's voice boomed. "Everyone in. Now." Alcera and Darren ran toward the dropship, jumping inside just as it lifted off. Enemy fire followed them, but it was too late. They were free. As the ship flew away, Alcera finally relaxed. Darren sat beside her, grinning. "Not bad, warrior." Alcera smirked. "Not bad yourself, human." Commander Vance approached. "You saved those soldiers today. You fought like one of us." Alcera looked at him, then at the humans around her. "I did not fight as a princess," she said softly. "I fought as a warrior." Vance nodded. "And a damn good one." As the stars stretched before them, Alcera knew she had found her place. not as a symbol, not as a royal, but as a true warrior. The dropship flew through space, leaving the battlefield behind. Inside, the air was filled with exhaustion, relief, and quiet victory. The rescued soldiers sat against the walls, their wounds bandaged, their eyes filled with gratitude. Alcera leaned back against a metal crate, her body aching from the fight. Darren sat beside her, arms crossed, watching her with a small smile. "You did it," he said. "Not just today, but everything. You proved yourself." Alcera exhaled, feeling the weight of the battle settle in her chest. "I didn't do it alone." Darren chuckled. "No, but you were the one who led the charge. You fought harder than any of us." Commander Vance walked over. His uniform was stained with dirt and sweat, but his expression was one of deep respect. "You saved lives today, Alcera. Without you, we would have lost those soldiers, and maybe even more." She looked at him, then at the others around her. The humans she had once seen as strangers, as outsiders, now felt like something else. Family. When they reached the main human fleet, the wounded were taken to the med bay, and the team was called in for a debriefing. Alcera followed Darren and Vance into the command room, where Admiral Hayes, a tall, stern-looking woman, stood waiting. She studied Alcera for a long moment, then spoke. "You were given to us as a political gift, a symbol, but you have become something much greater." Alcera held her head high. "I never wanted to be a symbol." The Admiral nodded. "Good, because we need warriors, not symbols." She turned to Vance. "Your report." Vance smiled. "She fought alongside us like one of our own. She's earned my trust." Darren stepped forward. "And mine." The Admiral looked at Alcera again. "And what do you want, Alcera of the Zayari?" Alcera took a deep breath. For the first time, she knew the answer. "I want to stay." A quiet murmur went through the officers in the room. Admiral Hayes raised an eyebrow. "You're royalty among your people. If you stay, you risk never returning home." Alcera met her gaze. "My home was never the palace. My place is here, fighting for something real. Fighting with warriors I trust." Darren grinned. "She belongs with us, Admiral." After a long pause, Hayes nodded. "Then welcome to the Terran forces, Alcera. You've more than earned it." The next day, Alcera stood on the observation deck of the ship, gazing at the vastness of space. The stars stretched endlessly, a reminder of how much more was out there. Darren walked up beside her. "So, you're really staying?" She nodded. "I was given to the humans as a gift, but you gave me something in return, a purpose." Darren smirked. "We'll have to get you a proper Terran uniform." Alcera smirked back. "As long as it doesn't itch like the Zayari royal robes." Darren laughed. "We'll see what we can do." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars. Finally, Darren spoke again. "You know, if you're staying, I guess we'll be fighting side by side a lot more." Alcera looked at him, her eyes full of certainty. "Good. I wouldn't want it any other way." As the ship moved forward into the unknown, Alcera knew this was only the beginning of her new life, a life she had chosen for herself. End of story.